Jamal Carter first noticed the color of the water on a Thursday, right after morning announcements, when the hallway outside his classroom usually smelled of crayons and cinnamon muffins. Instead, he caught a metallic tang in the air, faint but unmistakable, like pennies soaked in bleach. The old galvanized fountain burbled, and a sickly orange plume swirled briefly before clearing. He wiped the spatter from the sleeve of his worn tweed blazer, then glanced toward Mrs. Hernandez's second-grade line, waiting to sip. 9-year-old Nia Conway, ponytail bouncing, leaned forward, pressed the chrome button, and recoiled at the taste with a scrunched nose Jamal recognized. Lead pipes, same as his grandmother's house before they replaced the main. But school pipes were supposed to have been upgraded last year, weren't they? The intercom crackled. "Mr. Carter, please send Kayvon Banks to the nurse." Jamal's chest tightened. Kayvon had vomited twice this week already, and his mother's note mentioned persistent headaches. Jamal promised to keep watch. Now the boy slumped at his desk, skin a dull grey-brown instead of the usual honeyed glow, eyes cloudy and distracted. "Hey, champ," Jamal whispered, kneeling beside him. "Nurse McBride's got those lemon ice cups. Think you can walk?" Kayvon nodded weakly. Jamal led him into the corridor just as Principal Morris hurried past with a clipboard and forced smile. "All good here, Mr. Carter. District inspection this afternoon. You know how optics are." Optics, Jamal almost laughed. In the staff lounge, the rusty smell grew stronger. A loose ceiling tile revealed pipes wrapped in peeling insulation. Water stains feathered across acoustic panels like bruises on skin. Jamal filled a styrofoam cup from the tap. Even under fluorescent glare, the liquid blushed a pale amber. He set the cup beside the coffee maker and snapped a photo with his phone. Evidence, just in case. At lunch, 3 students complained of stomach cramps. By recess, 5 more sat out dodgeball, dizzy and flushed. Jamal marched to the office. "We need bottled water delivered today," he told Morris, who barely looked up. "The district can't authorize that expense without lab results," the principal said, voice tight. "Besides, Public Works says the mains were tested last month." Jamal felt heat rise behind his eyes. "And yet children are getting sick." Morris lowered her clipboard. "Off the record, the city plans to relocate families from Cedar Street estates next spring. New mixed-use development. If word of contamination leaks, the whole deal stalls. You understand the politics." Jamal understood too well. Cedar Street estates, built in the 60s, redlined from day one, had been labeled blight in every mayoral campaign since he was a kid. Now developers like Holland Pierce Partners waved glossy renderings of coffee bars and rooftop gardens that somehow never included the current residents. Displacement disguised as progress. After dismissal, Jamal walked the 4 blocks to those same brick towers, their facades cracked like dried riverbeds. On the 3rd floor of Building C, Kayvon's mother answered the door, eyes rimmed red. "He's sleeping," she whispered. Inside, peeling paint flaked above radiators. A brittle notice papered the wall. "Pending environmental clearance. Do not remove." She poured Jamal a glass of water. It shimmered faintly gold. "City said it's just minerals," she sighed. "But my baby keeps throwing up. What am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go?" Jamal's throat tightened. "We'll get answers," he promised, pocketing the glass in a zip seal bag. Back home, he spread textbooks and lab supply catalogues across his kitchen table, calculating costs, lead test kits, sample vials, postage to a certified lab. His bank app showed $83 until payday. He closed the screen, opened a new tab and typed "Crowdfunding Environmental Justice Neighborhood Lead." Midnight ticked past. Jamal drafted an email to Dr. Sidney Ames, an environmental health professor who'd guest lectured at his college. "Remember me?" he wrote. "I think my students are being poisoned, and nobody wants the hassle of proving it. I need guidance." He hovered over send, then clicked. Outside, Cedar Street's amber sodium lights flickered. Sirens wailed 2 blocks east. The neighborhood felt like a throat clearing before a scream. Jamal wiped fatigue from his eyes, unaware that across town, in a marble-floored boardroom, a development executive pinned an aerial photo of Cedar Estates to a corkboard, red X's marking buildings set for demolition Phase 1. Jamal's school sat inside a yellow outline labeled Opportunity Zone Education Innovation Hub. Morning would bring polite reassurances, maybe a district memo about isolated incidents. But Jamal already sensed the truth. Cedar Street was being poisoned twice, first by the pipes, then by the silence around them. He saved the test kit page to his cart, shut the laptop, and stared at the ceiling. In art class, he taught kids that blank space is never empty, it's potential. Somehow, he'd turned this blank page of uncertainty into something fierce, something that couldn't be ignored. He owed them that much. Outside, dawn's first light touched the sagging school roof. Rumors were turning into clues, and clues demanded action. Jamal promised himself, no more whispers. Tomorrow, he would speak loud enough for the whole city to hear. Jamal Carter arrived at school before sunrise. The janitor, Mr. Isaac, raised an eyebrow, but said nothing as Jamal unlocked the art room. Inside, he set his messenger bag on the desk, rolled up his sleeves, and opened the box of lead test strips he'd scraped together the money to buy. He dipped one into water from the classroom sink. The strip changed color within seconds. Orange, then red. His breath caught. According to the chart, that was triple the acceptable limit. He filled 3 small vials, labeled them carefully. Room 209, Sink A, water fountain, east hallway, main bathroom tap. He packed them into a padded envelope addressed to Clean Earth Labs, a non-profit lab in Milwaukee that tested samples from underserved communities. Dr. Sidney Ames had arranged the fast track. Jamal didn't tell anyone, not yet. He needed more than outrage. He needed undeniable proof. During third period, he watched his students paint sunrises and cityscapes with joyful abandon. But several asked for breaks. Nia Conway again said her head hurt. Caven's desk was still empty. "Is Caven okay?" Jamal asked gently, kneeling beside Nia. "My mum said he went to the hospital last night," she said, frowning. He had real bad shaking. Jamal's hands clenched into fists at his sides. No one was coming to help. Not the city, not the school board. If the community didn't fight for itself, Cedar Street's children would be statistics on some chart, footnotes in another forgotten report. That afternoon, Jamal visited the local records office. He signed his name on the visitor log, showed his ID, and requested municipal water records for Cedar Street Estates and the surrounding school zone. The woman behind the glass window chewed her gum slowly. "These aren't online?" Jamal asked. "Some are," she said, "but anything pre-2001 is archived." "May I?" She pointed him toward a metal cabinet labeled District 5 Infrastructure. The drawers squeaked like old playground swings. Inside, dusty manila folders were stacked haphazardly. It took 2 hours, but he found it. Water testing records, Cedar Estates, George M. Boone Elementary, 1997 to 2019. The most recent entry, 2015. Status, deferred. He flipped pages. The line items revealed a pattern. Test results withheld, follow-up visits cancelled, handwritten notes marked sensitive, discuss internally. One folder even included a stamped letter from a developer, Holland Pierce Partners, urging city officials to avoid unnecessary disruptions to strategic redevelopment sites. So the delay was deliberate. By the time Jamal stepped outside, the sky had turned a soft lavender. He sat in his car, fingers gripping the steering wheel. He could feel the storm building, but he still didn't have thunder. Not yet. His phone buzzed. One new email, subject, sample results, urgent. He opened it. Mr. Carter, the water samples you submitted from George M. Boone Elementary School tested positive for elevated lead concentrations far exceeding EPA thresholds. Recommendation: immediate discontinuation of water use in affected zones. Children under 12 are at severe risk. Please see full report attached. Dr. Sidney, it Ames, Clean Earth Labs. Jamal stared at the numbers. Confirmed. Undeniable. Dangerous. He'd known it in his gut, but seeing it in black and white, on letterhead from a scientist, it made something inside him lock into place. This wasn't just about sickness, this was environmental assault. The next morning, Jamal walked into the teacher's lounge with 10 printed copies of the Clean Earth report. He laid one on the table next to the stale donuts and watched heads turn. Ms. Gaines from 3rd grade squinted at it. "This for real?" "Yes," Jamal said. "The fountains, the taps, the classroom sinks, they're contaminated." Mr. Watkins, the science teacher, looked up from his coffee. "What's the district saying?" "They're not," Jamal replied. "They haven't tested in nearly 8 years." Murmurs spread. "What do we do?" someone asked. Jamal looked around. "We demand immediate shutdown of all water lines, bottled water deliveries for every room, and replacement infrastructure before fall term. We file a grievance. We write letters." A voice from the back said, "They'll blackball you." Jamal turned. "They're already poisoning our kids. What else do we have to lose?" He delivered a formal request to Principal Morris later that afternoon. She glanced through the report with visible discomfort. "This is outside protocol," she said. "Chain of command! I've followed the chain. It led to silence." Morris's jaw tightened. "You've made your point." He left the report on her desk. Outside, he pressed send on another email, this one with the full lab report attached, to a list of people he knew wouldn't ignore it. Local reporters, parents' groups, and a law student he met once at a district advocacy night who now clerked for the City Council's Environmental Committee. By nightfall, it had over 300 downloads. Then came the phone call. Unknown number, he almost didn't answer. "Mr. Carter?" a man said, voice clipped and professional. "This is Dwayne Farr from Holland Pierce Partners. I understand you've been circulating some rather aggressive claims." Jamal didn't reply. Farr continued, "Our firm is deeply invested in urban redevelopment, and we'd hate to see your name dragged into legal matters that complicate things. These kinds of allegations can hurt careers." Now Jamal spoke. "Is that a threat?" "It's a suggestion," Farr replied. "Let the city handle it. Walk away. Maybe there's a consulting role for you once this all settles down." Click. Jamal dropped the phone. They were afraid. And when power gets scared, it gets dangerous. That night, he typed a statement and posted it online. The children of Cedar Street deserve clean water, clean air, and dignity, not silence bought by real estate firms. I am not backing down. If you won't fix it, we will. If you won't speak up, I will. He hit post and closed the laptop. Cedar Street slept uneasily. But tomorrow, it would wake louder than ever. By the time the sun broke over Cedar Street, the news had already started to spread. Local online blogs reposted Jamal's statement. His inbox flooded. His name was whispered in corner stores, discussed in classrooms, and shouted from porch stoops by people who had long stopped believing anyone would fight for them. And just like that, Jamal Carter became more than a teacher. He became a problem. At George M. Boone Elementary, Principal Morris greeted him in her office with a strained smile and a stack of paper. "I've been directed to place you on temporary administrative leave pending an internal investigation." Jamal blinked. Investigation into what? Improper handling of internal reports, breaking chain of command, breach of district confidentiality. "They're not mad I found poison in the water," he said slowly. "They're mad I didn't wait for their permission to say so." Morris avoided his eyes. "You've caused a stir. I suggest you use this time to reflect." "Reflect?" Jamal stood. "While they keep feeding lead to children?" "Mr. Carter, you know I'm right." She didn't answer. Jamal turned and walked out. He passed students waving at him, clueless. Staff giving him half-hearted nods, unsure whether to applaud or avoid him. He felt the divide growing beneath his feet. That afternoon, Jamal sat on his stoop, sipping bitter coffee and watching neighborhood kids skip rope in the street. Aaliyah Brooks, a single mother and lifelong Cedar Street resident, approached with a plastic folder in hand. "Everyone's talking," she said, handing it over. "This is Kayvon's medical file. Blood work came back yesterday." Jamal flipped through. "Elevated lead levels, memory loss symptoms, sluggish behavior." "We knew something was wrong," Aaliyah said, "but the hospital blamed nutrition, said maybe it was stress. Nobody ever said water." She looked up at him. "You told the truth when no one else would. What do we do now?" Jamal closed the folder. "We organize." By the weekend, flyers were stapled to telephone poles. East Cedar Street Community Forum, Sunday, 4 p.m., Mount Calvary, church basement topic, water, health, and our homes. Over 80 people showed. Mothers in headscarves, grandfathers with canes, teenagers with TikTok accounts already filming. Jamal stood before them, flanked by folding chairs, bottled water cases, and a borrowed projector. "We were never meant to stay," he began. "The city made its plans years ago to erase this neighborhood, not improve it. First, they ignored our infrastructure. Now, they poison it. But we're still here." He showed them photos, water samples, medical notes, the 2015 deferred city reports. Then came the lead readings from the school, the silence from district leaders, the offer from the real estate firm, and finally, the truth. "They are banking on us being quiet." A woman in the back stood. "We're not quiet anymore." Applause broke out, applause that didn't end quickly. Days later, an open letter appeared in the Chicago Defender, signed by 47 community leaders. It read, "We demand full environmental testing at Cedar Street Estates and Boone Elementary. We demand immediate medical screenings for all residents. And we demand that the city stop evicting and start listening." The mayor's office issued a 2-line response. "We are reviewing the matter. There is no current evidence of ongoing contamination." No evidence because no one had looked. Until now. Zora Yates, a junior journalist at an independent black-owned outlet called The Ninth Voice, reached out to Jamal for an interview. "I've covered housing injustice before," she said. "But what you're up against, it's layered. Corruption, displacement, health crisis, and education wrapped into one." "Because that's what we live," Jamal told her. "Nothing ever happens to us in pieces. It comes all at once." Zora's article dropped the next day. Poison and Progress, How Cedar Street Became the Battleground for Urban Renewal's Darkest Cost. The article included a leaked map sent anonymously to her inbox that showed Cedar Street estates marked for demolition by Q1 of the next fiscal year. No mention of community input, no timeline for relocation, just colored zones, red for removal, green for innovation. Jamal's school was in the green. As the fight grew, so did resistance. Someone broke into Jamal's car and tore up his lesson plans, leaving behind a single, sticky note on the windshield. let it go. Or else. Aaliyah's cousin, who'd volunteered to distribute flyers, found her tires slashed outside the grocery store. A social media account claiming to be concerned parents began posting that Jamal was stoking paranoia and sabotaging progress. But none of it slowed them down. They set up a makeshift health clinic inside the church basement. Volunteer nurses tested blood levels for anyone who showed up. Bottled water donations arrived from local unions, sororities, and even a distant cousin of Aaliyah's in Detroit who'd lived through the Flint crisis. Zora returned with a film crew. "They think the community is disposable," she said as she adjusted her lens. "We're about to show them that Cedar Street isn't going anywhere." The tipping point came when a city council member, under pressure from protesters, publicly called for a hearing. Jamal was invited to testify. He stood in the echoing chamber, city flag behind him, and spoke calmly, clearly, unwavering. "You have poisoned black children for profit. You have buried reports under bureaucracy. You have sold our future to people who don't live here, don't teach here, don't raise their babies here." He raised Kayvon's medical file. "This child matters, this block matters, this street matters. We are not forgotten, we are watching." The next morning, bulldozers arrived without warning. They began tearing up sidewalks on the west edge of Cedar Street. Jamal stood in front of the machines, arms spread. "You can't bury us alive," he said. The bulldozers arrived before sunrise, 4 of them, yellow steel monsters rolling through the haze with the quiet arrogance of inevitability. They didn't blare sirens, they didn't announce themselves, they just showed up with city permits taped to their windshields and dirt on their treads. And they weren't headed for the condemned lots on the outskirts. They were headed for the heart of Cedar Street. Jamal Carter heard them from 3 blocks away. The low groan of engines, the crunch of wheels on cracked pavement, the sharp clang of metal scraping curb. He bolted out of bed, barely slipping on shoes as he ran toward the noise. By the time he reached the corner of 16th and Cedar, the first of the bulldozers had mounted the sidewalk near Kayvon's building. A city worker with a clipboard stood beside a portable fence. 2 more men unfurled orange netting across the front steps of Building C, where 3 generations of residents still lived. "What are you doing?" Jamal yelled, pushing through the crowd that had already gathered. The worker didn't flinch. "Preliminary soil remediation," he said flatly. "Where's the notice? The vote? The relocation plan?" The man adjusted his sunglasses. "Emergency order from the Department of Environmental Review. Toxic ground. Dangerous for children. Orders are to level the sidewalk, remove concrete, and secure the zone." "Secure it for who?" someone shouted from the crowd. Another voice chimed in. "Y'all didn't find danger until we found the lead." Jamal stepped forward, fury tightening his throat. "You ignored our reports. You ignored the water. Now you show up with a bulldozer and call it safety?" A voice behind the machines responded. "Back away, Mr. Carter." It was Dwayne Farr, Holland Pierce's clean-cut consultant in a pressed grey jacket, arms folded like he was hosting a dinner party instead of overseeing destruction. "This land is compromised," Farr said smoothly. "We're acting on city orders." "You mean the same city that said there was no contamination last week?" Jamal snapped. Farr smiled. "Interesting how fast things move when the spotlight turns on." By 8 a.m., the live stream had begun. Teenagers with phones circled the scene, broadcasting every clang and crush of machinery. The comments flowed in. "Why no warning? They trying to erase Cedar Street without blinking. This is what environmental racism looks like in real time." "Stand your ground." Kayvon's grandmother, Mrs. Lula May, stood in her robe, arms crossed, not moving an inch. "They'll have to roll over my bones first." Aaliyah arrived minutes later with a loudspeaker. "We ain't leaving," she said, raising it high. "Not until the truth is heard in City Hall and in every damn boardroom that wrote this neighborhood off." Cheers erupted. Jamal turned to the workers. "You want to dig up something? Dig up the test results you hid? Dig up the 30 years of deferred maintenance. Dig up your red lines, your loopholes, your corporate grants." One of the machine operators, young, Latino, eyes down, shut off his engine. A moment passed, another machine followed. The operation ground to a halt. The silence was louder than the engines. Across town, reporters scrambled. By noon, 3 stations aired segments with helicopter footage of the protest. An anchor on a major network used the word ethnic cleansing, then walked it back an hour later. The mayor's office released a public statement by mid-afternoon. "We regret the confusion regarding today's soil remediation operation. It was not our intention to cause alarm. Effective immediately, all further demolition in the Cedar Street area is suspended pending review." It wasn't an apology. It was a strategic pause. But it gave Jamal and the community something rare: time. That evening at Mount Calvary Church, the basement hummed with anxious energy. Every pew overflowed with neighbors, activists, students, teachers, even a few cautious city employees in disguise. Jamal stood at the podium, exhausted but electric. "They didn't apologize," he said, "but they stopped. And that means we made them stop." Applause. "But don't let their delay distract you. We've only paused the wrecking ball. The machine is still aimed at us." He held up the soil report from the so-called emergency order. "You know what this says? That the ground beneath Cedar Street is dangerous for development. Not for us, for them. Because we dug up the truth. We made them uncomfortable. We made them seen." A man in the crowd stood, Mr. Arnold, a retired bus driver. "What's next?" he asked. Jamal didn't miss a beat. "Next, we demand full transparency. We demand compensation for the families affected by lead poisoning. We demand investment, not erasure." The next morning, Cedar Street residents marched. Not just locals, people came from Southside, Englewood, even Hyde Park. Clergy walked beside high schoolers. Nurses marched with mothers pushing strollers. A jazz band played behind them as a banner led the way. "We built this block. You don't get to bury us." They marched to City Hall. Mayor Keating didn't open the door, but the media did, and Zora Yates, camera on shoulder, was right in front. 2 days later, the mayor appeared on television. "We are deeply concerned by what has occurred in the Cedar Street neighborhood. An independent environmental justice commission will be formed to investigate both the contamination and the city's role in its handling." Still not an apology. But behind that polished face, everyone could see it now. Nerves. Because the machines had stopped. Because the papers were public. Because the people weren't afraid anymore. That night, Jamal sat with Kayvon on the porch. The boy held a coloring book in his lap, quietly drawing tall, sharp buildings in fire orange crayon. "What's that?" Jamal asked. Kayvon shrugged. "The machines." "You scared of them?" "No," Kayvon said, not looking up. "I think they're scared of us." Jamal smiled. Because maybe they were. For the first time in weeks, the phones at City Hall didn't stop ringing. They buzzed, pinged, and chirped from every desk. Reporters demanding statements, lawyers issuing subpoenas, concerned citizens asking why lead-poisoned kids were still drinking bottled water out of church basements. And the name Jamal Carter came up in every fourth call. At the epicenter of the noise, Jamal sat in his apartment with a burner phone in one hand and a thick notepad in the other. The real phone, the one with a Chicago Public Schools tag and his old job contact, was turned off, stuffed in a drawer, like a dead idea. The burner rang. Jamal answered. "Yeah?" "This is Councilwoman Patrice Dillard's office," a young voice said. "She wants to meet. Today, 5 o'clock. Not on record." He glanced at the clock. 3:17 p.m. "Where?" "District 11 Library, the back room." Then the line clicked off. By 4:58 p.m., Jamal was there, pacing near the bulletin board for ESL classes and GED sign-ups. The library was half empty, its yellow walls aging under old fluorescent tubes. At 5:01, Councilwoman Dillard appeared, tall, power suit, locks pinned back, phone in hand. "You've stirred a hornet's nest," she said, not sitting down. "They brought the hornets," Jamal replied. She looked at him for a long moment, then finally lowered her voice. "Listen, I know about the pipes, about the lead, about the soil reports. I also know the city's been lying. I've known for a while." "Then why haven't you said anything?" "Because until now, I didn't have anyone willing to bleed for it publicly." "You did." Jamal's brow furrowed. "So what is this? Support or a warning?" "Both," she said. "I can push for hearings. I can push to freeze redevelopment permits. But I need public heat to match political will. If I stand alone, they'll bury me the same way they're trying to bury your neighborhood." "You want us to keep protesting? I want you to keep showing up, loudly, visibly. I'll do the rest." They shook hands. Dillard leaned in. "Also, off the record, there's a memo you haven't seen, something internal from Holland Pierce, dated 6 months before the first lead awareness report. If I get it to you, you didn't get it from me." Jamal nodded. "I won't quote ghosts." 2 days later, the envelope arrived at Alia's front door. No return address, just her name, in block letters. Inside, 5 printed pages, internal communications between Holland Pierce executives and city engineers. One message stood out: begin phase out quietly. Lead risk is manageable but legally exploitable. Shift narrative toward healthful redevelopment to neutralize liability. Another email attached: memo to DPW, fast-track soil hazard classifications near Cedar Street. Use code 9C to authorize early demo without public hearing. Beneath it, a signature: M. Chisholm, Deputy Director of Infrastructure. It was the smoking gun. Zora Yates published the story that night under the headline, "Leaked Memos Reveal Cedar Street Evictions Were Planned, Not Prevented." Screenshots of the emails went viral. News networks scrambled to catch up. The city issued a frantic statement calling the documents unauthorized drafts. But it was too late. The message was clear: this wasn't negligence. This was strategy. The next day, Jamal received a phone call not to his burner, but to his regular number. The one from his teaching job, the one from a life before the fire started. The caller ID read George M. Boone Elementary, Front Office. He stared at the screen. It rang 5 times. He answered. "Mr. Carter," said a familiar voice, "Principal Morris. The district wants to offer reinstatement, full benefits, back pay. Your leave will be listed as administrative observation." Jamal paused. "And the lead?" "They're replacing the pipes. Water delivery started today." "So now that you've been exposed, do you want me back in the classroom? No apology?" There was silence on the other end. Then, "I'm following orders." Jamal chuckled bitterly. "That's always been the problem." He ended the call. That evening, Alia hosted another town meeting, this time in the gymnasium of a neighboring high school. Nearly 200 people showed. The energy had changed, no longer defensive, no longer just angry. Now it was focused, strategic. They formed 4 committees, legal support team, to coordinate with pro bono lawyers Health Watch Collective, to schedule pediatric screenings and connect with public clinics' media outreach, to control the story and amplify their truth, Resident Action Coalition. To speak at every council meeting, loudly and unapologetically, Jamal didn't lead the meeting. He sat in the second row, listening to a teenage girl named Delia explain how to turn local TikTok videos into political pressure. It was perfect. This wasn't about him anymore. Late that night, he walked the streets of Cedar Street alone. It was quiet, but not in the way it used to be. It was the kind of quiet that feels like a deep inhale, like the city itself was holding its breath. He reached the school. The front steps still bore the faint tire scuffs from the bulldozers, but new caution tape fluttered from the doors. A handwritten sign had been taped to the entrance. Temporarily closed due to pipe replacement. Safety first. Below it, someone had scrawled in black marker. Should have been years ago. His phone buzzed again. Aaliyah. Turn on the news, she said. Channel 5. The mayor. Live. In light of new evidence, we are launching a full ethics investigation into the Holland-Pierce development contracts. All Cedar Street redevelopment is on indefinite hold. The health of our citizens, especially our children, must come before business interests. Still no apology. But now they were playing defense. Jamal Carter sat back, the noise in his ears finally fading. Some calls don't go to voicemail, some hit you right in the chest. The demolition was supposed to erase them. The cracked tiles, the leaking ceilings, the mold-ridden stairwells, those were the parts the city wanted gone. But as crews finally entered the condemned wing of Cedar Street Estates to assess internal damage, something unexpected came tumbling from behind the drywall of Unit 2F letters. Dozens of them. They weren't addressed to anyone in particular. Some were dated from the late 1970s, others more recent. Most were handwritten in uneven cursive or all-caps block print, folded inside plastic sandwich bags, sealed with electrical tape. Each note was a time capsule from someone who had lived here, someone who had loved, struggled, or survived behind these walls. The first one read, "My son Jamal sleeps by the heater because our bedroom window don't shut. If this is ever found, know I did my best with what we had. Ems Carter, 1983. Jamal froze when Zora handed him the copy. "It's your mother?" she said gently. He took the paper in trembling hands. She used to talk about writing things down, but I didn't know she hid them. Another letter said, "To whoever finds this, if they tear this place down, I hope they build something for us, not just people with money. I want my grandkids to grow up with trees and clean air. I want them to matter." Signed, Mrs. Ellie Boyd, Apartment 3. Zora had been granted rare access to photograph the interiors before full renovation began. The discovery of the letters shifted everything. Now, instead of sterile images of decay, her lens captured something else. History refusing to be buried. "This place isn't just bricks and pipes," she told the community at the next forum. "It's testimony. These walls remember." Within 48 hours, a volunteer team formed. Teachers, local teens, amateur archivists. They combed through Building C apartment by apartment, cataloguing every letter they found. By the end of the week, they had over 140. Each note was scanned, copied, and posted on a public display wall inside the gymnasium. The exhibit was named Letters in the Walls, Voices of Cedar Street. People came from all over the city to read them. One mother read a note aloud through tears. "Dear City, my baby got asthma and you still let buses idle outside our window. Don't tell me it's not connected." Another child pointed to a letter dated 1992. "When the streetlights broke, we left them broken for 2 years. Then they said nobody reported it, but I did, 3 times. Jamal stood silently near the back of the room, watching faces change as words reached across time. Anger, nods, recognition, respect. "They tried to flatten us," he said to Aaliyah, "but they forgot something." "What?" "Stories aren't demolition-proof." Mayor Keating attempted to counter the damage. She announced a city-wide initiative. Rebuild with respect, promising input from displaced communities and preservation of legacy voices. A small gesture, but the optics were clear. Her administration was reeling. They offered a public partnership grant to Cedar Street organizers. A gesture of reconciliation. Jamal refused. "We don't want to be managed," he said. "We want to be heard." But they did accept funding from independent foundations, environmental justice groups, Black historical preservation societies, and even a grant from a national educators union. The first investment. A digital archive of all the Cedar Street letters open to the public, searchable by year, theme, or building. The second, a children's art therapy program at the community center, free for all kids affected by the lead crisis. One afternoon, as Jamal supervised a watercolor session, Nia Conway walked up, holding a blue and yellow painting of an apartment building with vines crawling up its walls. "This is what I think it should look like when they rebuild it," she said shyly. "It's not scary anymore. It's green." He crouched beside her. "That's beautiful, Nia. What's the vine for?" She shrugged. "It's strong. It doesn't care what wall it's on. It grows anyway." Jamal smiled. "Just like you." Later that week, Councilwoman Dillard returned to Cedar Street, this time flanked by 2 fellow officials and 3 press cameras. She stood beside Jamal in front of the gymnasium wall, the one now covered in laminated letters. "These voices will not be erased," she said firmly. "We're drafting legislation that mandates historical preservation for all communities under redevelopment. No more quiet demolitions, no more invisible lives." The crowd cheered, but Jamal's focus was on the kids in the back, Cavan and Nia, scribbling new letters on recycled paper, slipping them into their own plastic bags. "Where are you putting those?" he asked. "Behind the library bookshelf," Cavan grinned, "in case they try again." Not all victories came clean. The city quietly settled with the first group of affected families. No media, no headlines, just 5-figure checks and airtight non-disclosure agreements. Some accepted, others did not. Aaliyah refused the offer for Cavan. "No amount of money will buy back what you let happen," she told the lawyer. "You don't get to disappear my baby's pain." Instead, she joined the steering committee for a new Cedar Street Health Collective, organizing free screenings, legal support, and educational workshops. In private, Jamal still wrestled with rage at how long it had taken, rage at the pain ignored, rage at how close they came to being buried with bulldozers and excuses. He visited his mother's old unit. It was gutted now, just beams, dust, the faint smell of damp wood. He pressed his palm against one wall. Somewhere behind it, 30 years ago, she had slipped in a letter. He whispered, "We found it, Ma." And she had been right. She had done her best. Now so would he. The day the City Council voted on the Cedar Street Redevelopment Freeze Ordinance, the rotunda at City Hall looked different. Not whiter, though it had always been that. Not cleaner, though everything there smelled faintly of polished marble and power. No, today it looked like something more dangerous. Today it looked like Cedar Street. From the back rows to the front, the seats were filled with familiar faces, residents, parents, teachers, and teenagers who had turned hashtags into petitions, older men in worn work jackets, mothers clutching binders, children scribbling with crayons in their laps. No one shouted, no one needed to. Their silence filled the room with presence. At the center of it all sat Jamal Carter, suit-pressed, jaw set, a stack of letters in his lap. Across from him, in the cushioned seats reserved for council members, Holland-Pierce lobbyists whispered urgently into phones. Dwayne Farr stood against the far wall, arms folded, expression unreadable, his $800 shoes still spotless. Councilwoman Dillard stood when the meeting began. She cleared her throat and raised her voice just enough to carry. "I move that we permanently freeze all demolition and redevelopment plans involving Cedar Street estates and its adjacent school until a full environmental, historical, and ethical review is completed. The room didn't erupt. It inhaled. A pause. Then a second council member raised his hand. "I second." The motion moved to a vote. One by one, names were called. Yes? Yes. Yes. No. Yes. Yes. The measure passed. 10-2. Outside, cheers erupted as the crowd spilled down the steps of City Hall. Reporters shoved microphones toward residents. Flashbulbs popped. And in the middle of it all, Zora lifted her camera and caught the exact moment when Aaliyah burst into tears, her arms wrapped around Kayvon, who smiled the first full smile Jamal had seen in months. "They tried to build over us," she said later into a mic. "But we built louder, and we built together." The very next day, Mayor Keating announced her decision not to seek re-election. "Politics is about timing," she said during the press conference, "and I believe it's time for a new voice." Few believed it was voluntary, but no one cared enough to argue. Inside the Cedar Street gymnasium turned organizing hub, the chalkboard had been replaced with a painted mural. It showed a timeline, 1972. First families move into Cedar Estates. 1985, City Report deems neighborhood structurally at risk. 2015. Lead contamination reported and ignored. 2024. Voices rise. 2025. Victory declared. At the mural's center was a portrait of a faceless black woman with a pen in her hand and fire behind her eyes. Beneath her, she wrote us down. And we stayed. The letters kept coming. Not just from Cedar Street, from across the country. Neighborhoods in Baltimore, Detroit, St. Louis, schools in Newark, Cleveland, Memphis. Letters from other communities where children coughed and the pipes rusted and the soil cracked like skin. They sent photocopies, emails, voice notes. One read, "Your fight helped us realize we don't have to wait for permission." Another, "We thought we were alone. Then we saw your story." A school in Atlanta sent a painting by third graders, a picture of a brick wall with flowers growing between the mortar. It was titled, "What Can't Be Paved Over." One afternoon, Jamal returned to his classroom, finally reopened, the pipes replaced, the walls repainted. A banner stretched over the chalkboard, "Welcome back, Mr. Carter." On his desk sat a gift box. Inside, a set of watercolors, a new whistle, and a note from Nia Conway that read, "You make us loud, even when we whisper." He stood there for a long moment, touched but heavy with reflection. Then he picked up the brush, dipped it in blue, and painted the words "We stayed" in wide, soft strokes across a clean, white canvas. That evening he was invited to speak at a symposium on environmental justice. As he approached the stage, applause met him like a wave. He didn't bring a slideshow, no graphs, no bullet points, just a bundle of the original letters, creased, stained, taped, and held them high. "These," he said, "are what saved us." He read one aloud. "If this ever gets read, it means we survived." He paused. We did. The final stop on his way home was to the abandoned lot where Building C used to stand. The grass had started to regrow. Trees cast long shadows. Someone had staked a wooden sign in the ground. On it, hand-painted letters, "Don't build until we're ready. And when you build, build us back." Jamal smiled. There were no machines now, no officers, no press vans, just wind, just sky, just the sound of Cedar Street breathing. The map had changed, no longer marked in red ink, no longer labeled Redevelopment Parcel 9A, no longer bordered by dotted lines indicating target for clearance. Now, on the official city zoning plan, the name Cedar Street appeared in bold black print, right where it belonged. No asterisk, no fine print, just the name. It hadn't always been like that. For years, it was District Zone 5, or South Urban Corridor. That was how they erased places without ever using an eraser. They removed the name before removing the people. But now the name was back. And it meant something. It meant they couldn't pave over it. It meant they couldn't forget. Jamal Carter walked slowly through the reopened community park. What had once been a gravel pit behind the old boiler building was now a soft green space with raised garden beds and a mural wall. Kids chased each other around the benches. Nia sat with chalk in hand, sketching a flower beside Kavan's name, smiling without fear. The mural behind her had been painted by volunteers and local artists, a winding cedar tree whose roots curled around the faces of residents past and present. In the branches were names written in gold: Ellie Boyd, Mrs. Lula May, M. Carter, his mother's name. Jamal reached out and touched it, then turned as Aaliyah approached. "They're renaming the school," she said. "It's official." He blinked. "To what?" "Cedar Carter Community School." He nearly laughed. "That wasn't necessary." She shrugged. "Tell that to the kids who voted on it. You're stuck now, legend." The school reopened with new copper pipes, filtered fountains, and bulletin boards covered in letters, not district memos, but community stories. Every classroom had at least one laminated copy of a Cedar Street letter, placed beside the Pledge of Allegiance. The new school motto: "Truth grows where we plant it." Zora Yates premiered her short documentary, Letters from the Wall, at a local film festival that spring. It didn't just win, it sparked a national conversation. More than conversation, it sparked policy. Within 6 months, a statewide mandate passed requiring water safety tests in all public schools built before 1990. Within a year, 5 new community preservation councils were formed across the state. Zora stood at the front of the theater after her screening, answering questions from students and reporters. But the only moment that stuck with Jamal was when she said, quietly, "We're not documenting trauma, we're archiving resistance." Jamal started getting calls from universities, guest lectures, fellowships, book deals. He answered some, ignored others. His heart, still, was in room 209, with its paint-splattered smocks and worn stools. He returned to teaching full-time, his first unit that fall, Art as Protest. Kayvon presented a poster titled, "What They Tried to Take." It showed a bulldozer backed into a tree, its scoop melting into roots. Nia made a mosaic that spelled out, "We stayed." On the first anniversary of the vote that saved Cedar Street, the residents held a block celebration. Food trucks lined the sidewalk. A stage was erected outside the former Boone Elementary entrance. People wore shirts that read, "Cedar Lives" and "Still Here." Banners stretched between lampposts. They held a moment of silence for the lives impacted. Those who got sick, those who moved away before justice came, those who passed too soon. Then the music started. Gospel choirs, marching bands, spoken word poets. Jamal didn't speak, he listened. Because this time, the community didn't need a microphone. It had found its voice. Later that evening, after the crowd had thinned and the lights had dimmed, Jamal stood alone under the street sign, newly bolted into place. Cedar Street in white letters on deep green, fresh and bold. He remembered when the sign had been rusted, its name almost unreadable. Now it gleamed. He reached into his coat pocket and unfolded the copy of the letter he'd first found in the wall. His mother's handwriting, worn soft with time. "If this is ever found, know I did my best." He whispered to the wind. "You were the beginning." We just finished the sentence. Back in his apartment, he lit a candle by the window. He no longer needed to protest, no longer needed to live stream, no longer feared the phone calls in the middle of the night. He opened his journal and wrote one last entry. They tried to erase a place by renaming it, by poisoning it, by paving it over, but we planted something deeper. We buried letters in the walls, and when they came to tear us down, they found roots. He closed the book. Cedar Street was no longer a battleground, it was a blueprint.